begin with language to kick it off. How do some modern versions handle blank verse? What's important to keep in mind? What are some mistakes actors and directors make? And
you're taping this, right?
and the way the panel works is I ask maybe one or two questions, but they just free flow, talk amongst themselves, and can segue into whatever they want. So whoever wants to begin, maybe.
I'll start with the biggest mistake is not understanding what you're talking about. And it's so obvious when you go to a production, if the actors don't really understand the words they're saying, you're not going to understand it either. So when I direct, that's job one. We sit at table and we go through the entire text, segment by segment, word by word, meaning of words in the lexicon, the OD, the onions, and we use every resource we possibly can to figure out what Shakespeare was trying to say with those words. He created language, he made up words all the time, so you kind of have to go back through history and see what was he trying to say with that word, define it, and then find a definition that actually makes sense, active sense within the text.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that makes my skin crawl, is what I call actors, they act the gist of it. So they read the scene or the play and they go, oh, he's a little sad. And then they can play the whole thing sad. But after about 2 words or 2 lines of sadness, why are you still talking? What Shakespeare gives you is the extent to which you feel what you feel. That's why it's such rich language. And more often than not, they don't know what they're saying. They're just giving you the gist of what they think.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that makes people that watch it say they don't understand it. If the actors on stage don't know what they're saying, how's it ever going to get over to the audience?
Yeah, there's a reason it lasted, or has lasted 400 years. I mean, the only thing he really gave us were the words. And too many theaters, I think, and too many productions spell text T-E-C-H. And you lose what the most important thing is. And there's so many clues. I mean, Shakespeare wrote these plays to be performed. He didn't necessarily write them to be read. I'm sorry to all the English teachers in the room. They're wonderful reads, but they were written to be performed. And they were written to be performed with just a few days of rehearsal. So they're written in a way that the playwright directs the actors. Everything is in the text. Everything is in the punctuation. Everything is in the meter. That's really all you need, and that's what you see when you see these productions. I think you can pretty quickly understand who is getting across to you what they understand from the text and that makes sense to you. And oftentimes you'll hear someone who will get to a certain point in the text and do really fast like that. You're like, oh, they don't know what that part means, so they want to get to that. They really know what it means. So if you listen for those little bumps in the road, it's usually they don't really know what they're talking about.
It's like a song. It's like music. When you hear, if you sing or know people that sing or in the musicals, you can tell there's a part of the song that they're prepping for the note that they aren't sure about. Same with speaking. First, they'll speed through something and then go, "Oh, this is the part I really like," and that kind of text work, sitting at the table, going, "No, we're not going to say anything that we don't know." But I will say, I think one of the things that contributes to it is how training actors has changed. They're very much about feeling and emotion, and technique is harder to find and come by. So
and style too.
Yeah.
I found very few actors are being trained in a variety of styles that I think the older generation really knows very well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's such a fine line because people want to make Shakespeare as naturalistic as possible, but it is heightened text.
Yeah.
It is heightened language. It has to be something more than just Brando mumbling in the corner. But by the same token, it's still something that we understand today and we can make sense of. But it has to be that. I've worked up at APT some, and one of the biggest problems they have is finding people that can handle the text, but can also fill an outdoor theater that seats 2,000 people, because everyone, like you said, wants to play those little moments, wants to play those little emotions, and there's nothing little about it. There's no moment in Shakespeare that is a small moment. It's all people at the highest moments in their lives. But you can't just yell for 3 hours.
Nancy Shealy used to say about you actually act on the words in Shakespeare. There is no subtext.
There's no subtext.
It is action.
Yeah.
It's actionable.
I had a friend who described it as like, Shakespeare's pre-Freud. you know, and because of that, but we are all in a post-Freudian society, so we want to know why and feel and experience and then speak. But that's what, in my opinion, makes these plays even longer.
Yeah.
I've got to feel everything and then say it. Well, you're actually communicating something non-verbally, so the words become almost unnecessary, oddly enough to say. If we can get people to act on the line as they speak, it actually makes it much more exciting, visceral, it gets people engaged. It can.
If you see palsy Shakespeare, it's a pretty good sign that the person isn't doing it right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're not trusting it, the direction, the language, something.
There are very few pauses, and they're written into the text.
Mhm.
There will be beats missing when Shakespeare wants you to pause.
Yeah.
So are we all fully proponents
Mhm.
here? Yes,
Mhm.
okay.
To a degree. I mean,
Yeah.
people often ask me that when I do like high school talkbacks and so forth. They're like, I've heard about and pentameter and the folio, and how do you use that? What do you do with it? For me, it's a rehearsal technique. It helps you to quickly look at a speech and know what's important. I mean, if you look at to be or not to be, that is the question. It's just be, not be is question. Those are the words that are emphasized in that sentence. So you look at it and right away you know that entire speech is be, not be is question. It's about being or not being. That's all you need. The other words are just connectors to that. And it helps you through the rehearsal process, especially like I said before, when you consider that the actors in Shakespeare's time were doing these plays in the daytime. They were given very few portions of the script because he didn't want someone else getting a hold of the entire script, and it was also difficult to write. So you have to look at it quickly. You may rehearse your songs, you may rehearse your dances, you may rehearse your fights, but you weren't rehearsing the dialogue very much. So you look at it, you understand quickly what the emphasis is, how he wants it to work, and you go. And it's amazing how much direction he gave with just a poem.
And one of the things that we lose in that is the fact that, well, our equivalent K through 5 training, K through 12 training, that students used to learn rhetoric, used to learn English and how to orate. We don't really teach that anymore. So the expectation that those actors at that time had such a rich relationship with language to begin with, so they knew how to mine the text. It helped. Going back to actor training, you have to add that component on top of it, and this makes the rehearsal process even more difficult. So finding actors that can do it, like you said, makes it tough.
In our experience, actually, musical theater people are very good Shakespeareans.
Mhm.
We've hired a lot of musical theater folk.
They get melody.
Because they get melody,
Yeah.
they get rhythm, they get word emphasis, that, it's just part of their vocabulary.
You're one of the few theaters that actually, some other theaters are coming around to that. For a long time in this town, it's been a separation of church and state. I know a lot of musical theater performers that go into audition for Shakespeare, and they go, oh, look at all those Marriott credits. I'm sure he's very good, but not a Shakespeare actor.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
It is.
Yeah, they're losing out, believe me.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
What are some important or interesting aspects of Shakespeare's plays that we don't realize?
That's a hard one. That's a problem for me. So many Shakespeare productions that I see try very hard to do something no one has ever done before, and oftentimes you sort of say to yourself, well, you're just doing weird theater to be weird. And there's no textual justification, there's no reason behind it. I don't need to see Hamlet in a spacesuit. So for me, it's less about trying to find something that no one else has found before than it is about really mining into the stuff that people think is already there, or people know is there. I mean, it all comes down to basic human emotion. It's not brain surgery. He's talking about things that you all understand. I mean, you may not be a king, but I'm sure someone's wronged you before. So, people make it more complicated than it has to be.
Yeah, the themes are really universal, and that, the Shakespeare 400 that's happening in the city right now, I just saw the Measure for Measure. It's like the story holds up because the themes are so rich and strong, and we don't really need to get in the way of them. Things that unite us are universal, and sometimes you can get in the way of simple, pure, beautiful stories, and it can be complex to begin with. If you add something to it, it must, in my opinion, heighten the story.
Yeah, there's a lot of productions that I feel should say based on William Shakespeare.
Right.
Yes. The few times that we've done a concept Shakespeare, it's been really important to me that myself or the director who's doing it really base that decision on textual things.
Yeah.
That, it's seated in a real world that makes sense with the text.
Yeah.
If you're just layering something on, it's never going to make sense.
I see a show that you can pick what concept was why they decided to do the whole play run. It's like, oh, great, now I've got that thing that was so cool. What about the rest of the play? You know, if you have to be, don't have to do anything, but you know, if people who are using concepts are diligent about, does the concept maintain, does it hold up, does the story suffer by virtue of it?
Yeah, it's like when you see a play and there's an incredible scene and you leave and go, oh, I see, he wrote a really good scene and then built a play around it, so they watch the whole thing.
Right.
It doesn't work.
But going back to the question about, you know, things that you may not realize, I think what a lot of people don't realize when they see a Shakespeare play is that Shakespeare did create language. He made up words, thousands of them. His audiences didn't really know what those words meant because they'd never heard them before. And the hardest thing to teach people is to relax at the beginning of a Shakespeare play and not feel like you have to know exactly everything that's being said. If you watch the actors, you can see their expressions and their actions, it's going to inform you. Just relax and let the words wash over you and don't get so hung up on, I don't know what that word means, you know? And if you do that and relax into the play, you're gonna understand 95% of what's being
And I
said.
think the inverse of that is true as well. So many times you'll see people who try to over-intellectualize the Shakespeare play and not just sort of follow along with your mind. I can't count the number of times that I've been in a play where there's a line that someone speaks in French that's supposed to be funny. And I know there's way more people laughing in the audience that actually speak French. And around them, thinking, oh, I got that, I'm quite clever. You know, it's the same thing with Shakespeare. Just people need to get out of their own way with it. And just the emotions are so strong, the text just brings them home.
I bet there's even less Welsh speakers too.
We were joking before about which Shakespeare's plays would be staged at the Iowa caucus. I think it's an interesting response to that. I read them a statement earlier that I told them I'd ask them to comment on that somebody from the committee had asked me, and that is we view his plays through contemporary eyes. We see multiple perspectives in contemporary feminism, for example. This makes the text, sometimes edited, usually interpreted, the driver of a production. Any comments on that?
I don't think that we can help but view Shakespeare through modern eyes. We're in the modern world, so I mean, I think that totally makes sense. You know, and for me, as a female director, I do look for those feminist moments, or those moments of women being strong. I mean, Shakespeare actually gave us some of the strongest female characters ever written for the stage. Why not, you know, enjoy that and celebrate that and make that part of your production? But to, you know, I don't think I would approach a play as, you know, okay, I'm going to have to make this a whole feminist statement, and that's what the play is about, because that's putting something onto it that didn't exist in Shakespeare's time. So I think you find those moments of feminism, or moments where you can comment on the action of the play, but, you know.
I think it's the taming of the shrew argument. So many, I work with so many actresses who say, God, I would never say that. Well, but they don't make that argument when they're doing Ibsen or Chekhov or Moliere, because they realize that that is speaking of a period. Or even something like Glengarry Glen Ross. I mean, it's speaking of a period. And in Shakespeare, because people are so willing to take it out of context or take it out of history, there's much more argument of like, oh, a woman would never say that. Taming the Shrew is a problem play. I mean, who would end a play like, well, he did.
Yeah.
So figure it out.
Figure it out, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll find your take on it that makes sense coming out of your mouth, you know?
And I think those kinds of questions are, for me, where a great concept could happen. Like, how do I make that work for me today? Well, let's see, let's try, you know, because if you do it, period, quote unquote, it does ask certain things of the cast, the directors, the designers, that could make you uncomfortable. You know, we keep throwing this phrase trigger warning around nowadays, and it pops up more and more and more. And if the writing is strong and the themes are controversial, that might not be a bad thing for an audience to wrestle with. Like, where do we stand on this issue? What does this do to us? How could she do that? Any of these things. I remember I did a production of Othello years ago, and the director wanted Desdemona's death to be submissive, was basically what happened. She didn't really fight back. And the reviewers went after that Desdemona, like a woman would fight back. I agree, but she directed me to not do that, you know? And it was just kind of like back and forth of tension, and the director was a woman. She was like, I want this image of love to the end. And even that'll give you, and it was hard for her. She's a 6-foot woman who's been like thrown down. She's like, you mean I just gotta die? It was like, and the three of us working it out, we kept on the same page. But even then, it didn't solve it for every audience member, because they didn't go through the conversation that we went through. And I personally like it when a play doesn't answer every question for me. You know, I wanna go, I don't know if I like that. Oh, I love that. Like then, the audience's conversation, the intermission and after the play is much more provocative as opposed to, where are we going to dinner? You know? And I'd rather that they be challenged. Yeah.
So speaking of decisions, could each of you share with us an artistic decision you made in context of a Shakespeare production, and the reason for the decision you made? Whether it's directing choice, acting choice?
Sure. I was workshopping, I just moved to Chicago, so in Pittsburgh and in Detroit and other places. I was workshopping Shakespeare plays with inner city kids. So me and a bunch of friends would give them a play, and they would cultivate a language for the play, and then we'd play the old people. And for this Hamlet, this cut down Hamlet, all of Hamlet, Ophelia, all the young people spoke in spoken word, same language, but just put their twist on it. And we stayed within the Shakespearean form to kind of give this juxtaposition of the two worlds. And it livened them up in such a way, because it didn't seem distant, or the phrase they use was museum theater. It was like, oh, I could really see this way. And I learned a lot in doing that. What was really cool to me is that Shakespeare holds up. And if you put it in the mouth of a spoken word artist, it still holds up. And that to me is damn good writing, which was exciting. So I love playing with it that way.
I'm an actor, I don't make decisions.
One of the things that comes up for me a lot is when I direct is diversity. You know, how does a student asked me once, a young African American girl, she was like, where do I exist in this world? And anywhere you want is the answer. It really is. But getting them to I mean, I went to the same thing as a young actor. So let me do Shakespeare, Chekhov, and Shaw. Really? You know? And it really was looking, and that for me is a concept in some ways. Like, we have to make this world reflective of the community in which we live. At least I want to see that. And that filter goes on for me no matter what. When I look at, like, it's like, well, one of the first things I cut are any negative references to race. And Shakespeare's plays have a lot of them, you know, and accounting for that. You know, I actually can't say, you swarmy Ethiop to her. That doesn't compute for me, you know? And those things that we hadn't had to think about for a long time, we now do. So, I don't know that it's an interesting design or concept choice, but it's certainly accounting for the presence of the company is huge.
I think it's talking about the universality of Shakespeare's themes. I was doing the Henry IV's William Shakespeare a couple of years ago, playing Falstaff, and there's a speech where he sort of comes out of the battle and gives this honor speech to the audience, and it's basically a anti-soldier, anti-war, that sort of thing speech. But I came downstage to deliver it, and I noticed in the third row a gentleman that I had met at a function the day before, and I knew that he had a son who was fighting overseas. And it's impossible when you come into these plays not to sort of contemporize them in your head and associate the themes. But I was forced in that moment to go to places or think about things or see things that I wasn't necessarily always going to. And you're supposed to take the speech out to the entire audience. I did the entire thing to him. And it wrecked me more than it wrecked anybody else. But it was amazing how sort of that flash of being forced to contemporize all of the themes took me to a place that I hadn't been to before, which was great and hard and all the wonderful things that we do as well.
Well, thank you. Before I open up to the audience for questions, I'd like to ask you, what for us is always a tough one, and that is when we judge a play, a Shakespeare play, what's the difference between what you consider to be an excellent production and a very good production?
For me, it's quality top to bottom. So many Shakespeare plays, there's actors that come in, and I was this way when I first came to town here. I'd never done Shakespeare, and I was suddenly doing all these Shakespeare plays, and I was playing 6 different roles with 2 lines each and carrying on a keg of beer, and to me, yeah, exactly, mustache, no mustache. Those, when I see a production like that, and I see the actors that are doing those roles with just as much commitment and just as much understanding of their lines, that to me shows a director who cared about the text and a verse coach that everyone listened to. I've worked in numerous productions where people sort of see the verse coach as trying to subvert the director. And I've even worked where verse coaches have been fired because actors have said, I don't want that person directing me, and the director says, well, we don't care about verse and text, let's get them out of here. And invariably the production suffers. I think if you can watch it and not ever be pulled out of the production because the guy over here who's pulling beer doesn't really understand what the hell he's saying, that to me is an excellent production. If you see it and there's those sort of levels, and then it's not only does it reflect badly on the production of the actors, but it reflects badly on what the director cared about and what the verse coach cared about, which to me is what's most important, which is the text.
To me, I think that there is a passion in storytelling, that everybody is in the same world, and that they're all building the story together and with passion, not just, okay, I'm here doing my lines, but really is invested in the story that they're telling. That to me raises the level.
Yeah, I said the same thing about a visceral storytelling, that the words are actions, so everything means something that's chosen. At the same time, I think it's important to bear in mind your own individual aesthetic and your own take on what it is. If you look at the Q brothers and you look at Chicago Shakes, even though they're housed in the same building sometimes, the Othello they're about to do with James Newton Meredith will not be the same one the Q's are going to do after. And if you measure them the same way, one's going to fall short. So taking it for what it is, if I go to see a high school production of Our Town, it shouldn't be the one that the Goodman does. But they both could move me if I take them for what they are. I think that's important. Sometimes we say, it has to be this, otherwise it's not excellent. It's like, well, what did they do? What are they up against? If you're comparing a storefront theater to the budget at Goodman or Steppenwolf, that's not fair. But is the story compelling? Are they going after something? Is it passionate? Do they make you lean in? Do you put your program down? You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff, which is harder and harder to do. Do I buy that person doing that thing? Whatever that thing is. If it's, Hamlet on the moon, God, please don't have to let that happen. But if it is, do I buy it? That doesn't make me care. Because the thing about it is, a lot of companies will take for granted the intelligence of their audience. And the audience will go on the journey you want them to go on with. If you don't sell out the story at any point, I'll go. Whatever you want to do, let's do it. Keep me with you. If you include me, there's a lot of plays now that I sit here, you stand there and perform, and then I clap because I'm supposed to, but it wasn't really about the audience. And I think what's great about Shakespeare's plays, when they're done well, excellently well, the audience is a character in the play. You're included in the journey. It's about you.
That's great.
Well, thank you very much. Before I open up to questions, I neglected to make sure I thank the rest of my committee of Chet, Roberta, Judith, and Alan for putting this together. So, are there any questions?
See you tomorrow.
Let me first thank you. I have a friend, I brought her book along, I've talked to David Allis about this. It's called Shakespeare Beyond English. Shakespeare is an English writer. During the Olympics, my friend Christy Carson wrote this book by going to the Globe Theater where they had people from Kyoto, Cape Town, Jura, all speaking in their own languages, doing Shakespeare. Is globalism a good thing for Shakespeare?
Absolutely. That's what I think what we were discussing earlier, what Alison was saying, when you first start watching a production and you're not very well versed in Shakespeare, the first 10 minutes are going to sound like Greek to you anyway. So it's the emotion. I mean, I'm sure if you saw one of those productions and didn't even know what the story of the play was, you would still follow it.
The only American one they did was the Q Brothers.
There you go. But no, the text is hugely important, but the reason that those productions are making sense is because the text to those actors is making sense in the way that they're saying it, so it will make sense to you. You don't have to understand the words to understand the text.
The great example is the Measure for Measure that just played with the Cheek by Jowl Russian company with super titles. And I know Measure for Measure very well, but I only checked the super titles to see who was who. I was like, oh, that's Lucio? Got it. And the way they play, their particular take on artistry was compelling, and the story held up. I was with a friend, and she was like, it is weird hearing verse not as verse because of how the language is. But you give over to that. Give over to that. And I think this globalization is quite necessary because it helps unify.
There was a Taming the Shrew by a Russian company, and right after we worked together, that was just incredible. And you did not need the super titles. In fact, the super titles were a little funny because they only gave portions. Yes. But you absolutely knew what was going on. You know, I'm sure even somebody who didn't know the play could follow the plot lines, and it was fascinating.
And they're global themes, like you said. I mean, globalism has to play a part in it. We're all part of the human race. We all feel and understand the same things, so it's going to work across boundaries.
You have a question?
Yeah, I was curious and hoping you could talk more about, you talk about temporary training of actors versus, I don't know, generations. Talk more about that and how that might impact an actor on stage doing Shakespeare.
Sure. In my estimation, I've worked now with Paul at Carnegie Mellon before that, and Paul Crucial training is what theater schools value has changed. And what I mean by that is there's trying to get prestigious alumni, trying to get famous alumni, how acting has shifted. It has changed how actors train. There's a great emphasis on emotion and personal connection. And where I see it show up the most is in voice training. So Edith Skinner was the standard. Speak with distinction. And the big criticism, maybe we watch all the Laurence Olivier films or all the great films of the 20s, etc. The actors, Marlon Brando, all those actors, they all had one thing in common, was that they all sounded the same. And as the theater began to diversify in race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, the programs began to adapt and say, well, we can't keep teaching the way we always taught because that will never sound like that person saying it. I think, and I agree with that. What we sacrifice in some ways is what we consider classic theater. You know, there are still people who do it. I do it. Some of the great Delaware, that program's gone, that taught that most of the people that worked at APT have left that place. So a lot of it is just shifting. It's not being pulled by a commercial impact, but the influx of television and film has impacted actor training.
Very small.
Yeah.
Everything is very intimate, very small, and you
Yeah.
don't find people who know how to use their voices to really reach the back row the way that we were taught in school. Or physicalize.
Oh, yeah, everything's
It's like this. Yes.
Everyone's in profile.
Right.
This is the thing I said before. It's not about the audience. It's like me and you connecting.
Yeah,
And then,
exactly.
and so just turning out becomes like old stagecraft and technique is a little bit not frowned upon, but it isn't maintained like it used to be. And for that, there are some schools, prominent schools, where you can go and train for 4 years and never really be prepared to be on a Shakespeare stage. Staging a Shakespeare play. You know what I mean? So that there are schools that are still committed that it be taught. How it's taught has changed. The impact of it has changed. Quite honestly, there are still very strong Shakespeare companies and companies committed to Shakespeare, but there are more tours and musicals. You know, so when you when you think about everything you want a student to get before they graduate, certain things get devalued considering what they're most likely to do upon graduation. You know, at Carnegie Mellon, Shakespeare's 1 semester in your sophomore year. Now, that doesn't mean it's a hell of a semester, you know, but the majority of the students graduating are And I still have those students call me, they're like, I just got cast in a Shakespeare play, can you remind me how to do that? And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, not over the phone, you know, but more and more, I mean, it's hard, at least in my things I've seen thus far, there are fewer and fewer Shakespeare plays that are done in that old, what we consider classic style. Not the speaking, hopefully, but it's contemporized set, contemporized concept, staging. So that way we would, very few corsets, you know, and all of that, it lends towards more contemporary vibes. So go take a look at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival website. You know, the plays are very emotion-based, driven, and it's about this kind of thing, which is just
John, you want to comment?
Well, it is the star culture as well. I mean, recently we lost Brian Bedford, who has been a stage actor for 60+ years and one of the finest stage actors I've ever worked with and ever had the privilege of working with. But the first thing in his obituary was he played Robin Hood in a Disney animated film as a fox. That's great. That's great. But that's what our culture is. You see it all the time. I mean, you see plays every weekend that would not get produced if they didn't have somebody who had 3 credits from Hot in Cleveland and the Steve Harvey Show in their name. It's a star worshiping culture. And people, when they graduate from college, you're right, colleges they don't send you a list asking for money and showing you 15 graduates who are working on stage. They show you their 3 who are on, One Life to Live, because that's what we're interested in, that's what we're fascinated by. So it is unfortunate, but the culture's going away from it. If I lived here and asked 10 people who was Brian Bedford, 1 of them might know. If I was in England and did the same thing, 4 of them might know. If I was in Canada, 8 of them would probably know. It's just culturally diverse and different.
We have time for 2 more questions, but we can.
Thank you. If you think back to Shakespeare's time, when there was no scenery, there were no props, except perhaps just a log on the stage, the language was the important thing. And of course, that colored the imagination of the audience, because he had to explain what they should see, what they should hear through the words. Today, we rely tremendously on tech. Do you think we've lost something by having so much heavy tech taking over from the importance of words, or are we using the tech in order to hold the audience's attention and explain the meaning of the words instead of allowing the words to speak for themselves?
It's a double-edged sword. If you're paying $76 to see a show, and it's 6 people on stage dressed all in black, simply speaking the words, unless one of them is Adrian Lester, you're not going to be that interested. You're not going to feel you got your money's worth. That just simply is a fact. So I think it's the audience pushes that because they want it and they expect it. But you could have all the tech you want, and it will be incredible, but the things that people will remember will be those moments where it gets still and quiet and it's just the text. And that at least, from my experience, gives one hope.
Yes, I want to address the question of, I think you said globalism. I'm an international playwright. I've worked with different countries. I'm a Fulbright specialist in theater, and my new show is about women from the Punjab, and we have translations of their verses into English, and they love it. They love it. They love that this is happening in English, and reaching, creating, it creates whole new horizons for international understanding, acceptance. In Spain, Shakespeare is very popular. He is featured in the Classical Theater Festival in Almagro, Spain in the summer. I saw Midsummer Night's Dream there. It was fabulous. It was delightful, and I think it can enrich the our experience of Shakespeare. So we don't lose anything by experiencing it in another language. I think that we gain.
I think it's a good way to end.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much.